Okay. I'm Sujin Choi, first year PhD student, and the paper I'm going to present today is Local Motion Basis for Learning Multi-Contact Character Movement, which is published in SIGGRAPH 2020. The content of the presentation is as follows. In computer game and film industry, there is a huge demand for simulating fast and complex interactions that involve multiple contacts between a character and environment or other characters. For example, imagine characters playing a basketball game. The characters need to dribble the ball while making various movements with different foot patterns. And there are some considerations when synthesizing motion with such multiple contacts. First, to make the character controller learn something from unstructured motion capture data. Previous work has aligned the motions by a global temporal parameter such as the phase. However, motion that involves multiple contacts in asynchronous patterns are very difficult to be aligned with a single global phase. And also, secondly, when the character is controlled by the control signals given by the user, reproducing various movements from the user signal is quite hard since the signal has low dimension while the full body motion is composed of high dimension. This paper proposes a novel data-driven framework to learn fast and dynamic interactions that involve multiple contacts. To solve the aforementioned problems, the paper proposed a local motion phase, which enables the model to learn the movements with asynchronous patterns. Also, the paper proposed a novel generative model, which enables various full body motion to be generated with a high-level control signal. To synthesize novel motion with the motion capture data, numerous data-driven animation techniques have been proposed. Previous studies have presented blending techniques performed with explicitly classified and segmented and aligned motions. However, the goal of this paper is to handle the motions including asynchronous contact patterns as well as dynamic switches, which are hard to be explicitly classified and aligned. Then time series models predict the current character pose from the previous motion and control signal. Using the phase variables, which represent the progression of the motion, the quality of the motion generated by time series model has been improved. Then the previous studies based on phase had to manually label the phase or define explicit rules about when the action starts and ends, which can be difficult and also sometimes ambiguous. So focusing on fast and dynamic movements, this paper aims to automatically compute the local motion phase of the individual bones. Moving to the method, this is the overview of the proposed system. Given the current state of the character and the control signal, the model predicts the variables for the next frame in an autoregressive manner. And the proposed framework is composed of gating network and the motion prediction network. The gating network computes a set of expert weights and learns how to dynamically combine those weights through blending coefficients to construct the motion prediction network. And there are two main components that enable the system to learn basketball movements from a large motion database. First one is to train the network using the local motion phases. And the second component is to train the network with sharp control signals generated from the proposed generative control model. Before going into the network, we'll see the input and output of the system. As the input and output exist in the time series window, I would like to explain the concept of the time series window, which is represented like this notation. And if the window is notated like this, it means that the n samples are uniformly collected within a time of t0 to t1 For example, in this case, if the n is 13 and the time interval represents to be -1 second to 1 second, starting from the current frame, 6 samples are uniformly sampled from the past 1 second, and another 6 samples are collected from the future 1 second, making 13 samples in total. Then the input vector at frame I is composed of 5 components like this. And the first component represents the state of the character in the current frame, including the bone positions, rotations, and velocity in root coordinate system where 26 bones were used. Then the second component is the control variables that make the character perform various basketball movements and consists of root trajectory, interaction vectors, and action variables. As shown in the figure, the root trajectory contains the position, direction, and velocity information and has the role of controlling the locomotion of the character. Then the interaction vectors are composed of 3D pivot vectors around the character root and their derivatives. These components together define the dribbling direction and speed, which enable a wide range of dynamic ball interaction movements to be learned. Then the action variables include 4 actions, and each of them has a value between 0 and 1. So during runtime, the interaction vectors produce different effects according to these action variables. Next, the conditioning fixtures are composed of ball movement and contact information. The position and velocity of the ball in the previous frames are used for the prediction of the next frame, and the ball control rate is used to exclude ball movement when the character is not interacting with the ball. Then the contact information of each end effector and ball in previous frames are included. Then this component is to describe the state of the opponent character. This W represents a binary label that tells whether the opponent is within the 5-meter radius of the user, and its role is to make this opponent variable active only when the opponent is close to the user. Then the G represents the root trajectory of the opponent, including position, direction, and velocity. And D is the distance pairs between corresponding joints of the user and opponent character. Finally, the last component represents the 2D local motion phase vectors of end effectors and ball, and the detail of this variable will be described in the later slide. So as shown in the—
Quick question. Is the ball also physically simulated by the system according to the input from the user, or is it separately given?
In the runtime, or?
Yeah, so in the runtime, the motion of the character will be simulated. Okay, but then how about the motion of the ball? Is it also simulated by the user input? I mean the character movement?
Oh, that's what I haven't thought of. Is there anyone who knows how this ball works in the runtime? In character key? No one?
First, I think the motion here is not physically simulated. If I get it correctly, am I right, Sujin?
Oh,
can you repeat what you said again?
The motions here are not physically simulated. If I
that means all of the motion is given. then if the ball of the motion is already given, then how would the character move according to already given ball motion?
I think I I'm not sure if I remember this paper correctly, but as far as I remember, first the character motion is synthesized, and I think the ball trajectory changes accordingly to make appropriate contact with the hand. No?
So trajectory of the ball will be changing according to the motion of the character. That
Yes,
means
if I'm correct.
that means ball of the motion of the ball is also simulated in this system.
Yeah, I think so, because the output contains the ball movement, so the network predicts the character and ball movement together, as Jung-gu said, I think. Okay, then going to the next. So as shown in the figure, the phase variable and control variables are given to the gating network and the generated control model respectively. Then the remaining variables are directly fed into this motion prediction network. Then the motion prediction network predicts the output of the next frame. As for the input, past and future frames were sampled together. And for the output, starting from the next frame, several frames in the future window represented as blue are predicted through the network. Then let me briefly explain each component of the output. So the first is the character state variables, including the pose and velocity of the character at the next frame. And these are future control signals sampled along the current to future time series window. And during runtime, these features are blended with the user control signals and then fed into the input of the next frame so that the character can produce plausible motion while following the user instructions. Also, conditioning features are computed, and here we contain the ball movement, and this delta ball rotation is the new variable which was not included in the input, and this parameter updates the orientation of the ball in the next frame. Finally, these are the parameters for phase updates and are computed in a fully autoregressive manner. So the new phase vectors are computed by interpolating the current phase vectors with the predicted ones. So now I will explain about the how local phases are extracted, which is the core section of this system. First, the motivation of using local phase is as follows. In previous research, the phase variable was used to specify the timing of the pose in the cycle. And this phase was defined based on symmetrically meaningful start and end poses. For example, when we think about the walking motion, we can specify the phase like this. When the left foot first goes down, it indicates 0. And pi when the right foot goes down. And 2 pi when the left foot goes down on the ground again. So this way, the remaining poses in the walking motion can be represented in the cycle between 0 and 2 pi. So aligning motions with phase variables has the effect of resolving the ambiguity problem that exists when the motion is synthesized through the network. For example, in case the user input is to make the character go forward, starting from the standing motion, the network has two options. The character can either start from the left foot or right foot. So when making the output, The network tends to average these options, resulting in floating motion. And previous studies utilized this phase to represent the motion, for example, locomotion and object interaction motion. However, motion including asynchronous movements where different body parts move at different frequencies cannot be defined with a single global phase. Like in the video, if the start pose and the end pose can be specified, a cycle can be defined with a single global phase. However, most of the movements cannot be explicitly specified in this manner. So as the different body parts have the different changing patterns. To handle this issue, this paper inverted the original concept of using a single global phase to a set of multiple independent local phases for each bone. So based on the contact transitions between each bone and the environment, the local phase can be extracted from the movement in full automatic manner. Then next is how the local phase is computed from the motion data. It's computed by feeding a sinusoidal function to the filtered slope function with this loss function. To obtain this G, first the contact between the bone and the environment are first extracted from the motion data. The value is set to 0 if there's no contact and 1 if the contact exists. And these contact values are then normalized within the window domain. And then the low pass filter is applied to the entire phase value. Then by optimizing this equation, the parameters in the sinusoidal function f can be obtained, which has amplitude, frequency, phase, and bias as the parameters. Then with this equation, only phase value phi can be computed using the optimized parameters. And thereafter, the final 2D phase vectors are computed using this equation. These are the results of local phases extracted from the asynchronous motion. Then now I will explain the generative control model. This model is composed of encoder, decoder, and discriminator. And given the control signal as input, the goal is to produce a latent phase of the control signal. So that during runtime, the system can produce a variation on input signals by adding noise to the latent code. The encoder is composed of 2 layers with value activation function. And given the smooth trajectory produced by blending the user signal and the autoregressive control signal from the previous time step, this encoder encodes the input into the latent code. Then the decoder also has 2 layers and reconstruct the control signal from the latent code. Finally, the discriminator distinguishes the generated control signal from the ground truth. At the last layer, the sigmoid function maps the output to be between 0 and 1 value. So the network is trained with reconstruction loss and adversarial loss. First, the reconstruction loss evaluates error loss between the original signal and the reconstructed one. Then the adversarial loss evaluates the score of the discriminator on real and fake input. Then during runtime, after the input signal is projected into the latent space, random noise is added to the latent code. Then the signal recovered by the decoder will have a value variance which is hard to be made and by the user. These figures show some examples of input and output control signals in runtime. While the input trajectory in in black has smooth shape. The output trajectory projected with different noise samples have some variation.
Can I ask you something?
Yeah.
So is the noise injected during the training time or not?
I think it's not. The noise is sample only runtime, during runtime.
Does it make sense to not to use the noise during training time, but using in runtime?
I think it has a similar effect using dropout. I think they're using dropout in training time, so I think it would have some kind of a noise injection scheme.
I see.
Is the using the dropout layer have similar effect with using noise?
It might. That's just my thought.
Okay, I will check how it exactly works later. Thank you. So the right figure shows the resulting motion that the variation in the control signals produced by the noise sampling lead to the different body and ball movements during dribbling, like this dribbling, holding motion, and interaction motion. After the local phases are computed, they are fed into the gating network, which computes the blending coefficient of the experts, and the network architecture of these two networks was not explicitly mentioned in the paper, and I guess both networks are simply composed of 3 layers as previous studies. So anyway, after the blending coefficients are computed from the gating network, they are fed into the prediction network, and then this prediction network receives the current state of the character as input and generates the pose for the next frame. Then the implementation details for training are as follows. Once the generative control model is pre-trained, the main network is trained in end-to-end manner. And Adam WR optimizer was used, and the learning rate and the dropout values were initialized with the value shown on the screen. And in order to prevent gating network from overfitting, teacher forcing training was applied. And the dataset used for training are also as shown on the screen. And for the result, compared to PFNM model, which utilized a global phase to align the motion, the proposed system aligned the asynchronous movement of different body parts and synthesized more detailed animation. Then LS10 is the alternative for learning time series data, however, suffered from strong unresponsiveness and missing detail of dynamic character control. Then compared to mode adaptive neural networks, both systems showed plausible results on forward action. However, only the proposed system properly handles side walking and moving backward motion. These are the animated results. The user can control the locomotion from slow or to fast movement and also spinning motion. And also the character quickly responds to the changing user control signal with the control signal, and with the randomly sampled noise vector, different dribbling motions are made. And with the interaction vectors, different motion with the ball are also made. And also the character can be handled in a situation where the obstacles are arranged. Then by controlling two characters, basketball play can be performed, and during the play, the system automatically triggers realistic behaviors, and such as pointing the free arm toward to the opponent character to block the opponent from approaching. Then since the local phase is defined and used for each body part, deactivating the local phase of the specific body part did not influence the remaining parts. For example, in the middle, as the local phases are deactivated for feet, the character do not make locomotion, however, still makes hand interaction with the ball. And computing the local phase for every foot based on its contact with the ground, the proposed system can be applied to quadruped motion. Then it showed better responsiveness on switching motion and synthesized more generalized compared to the original mode adaptive neural network. And compared to neural state machine that requires the motion to be carefully aligned through a single global phase, the local phase applied on object interaction motions automatically produce realistic movements. Finally, its conclusion. Contributions of these papers are as follows. First, this paper proposed a neural character controller that synthesizes a large variety of dynamic asynchronous movements. And secondly, this paper proposed a scheme to automatically extract phase variables at local level, which can be used to robustly align the unstructured motion database. And thirdly, the paper proposed a generative model that can convert a high-level user signal to various sharp signals which can be mapped to realistic character movement. Finally, the paper showed an evaluation of the proposed method compared to existing approaches. The system has a limitation in that it fails when the control signal given to the network is far from the data observed during training. Such unobserved signals may mislead the output of the motion prediction network to unrealistic motion. Finally, as future work, the author mentioned three things. First, currently the local phase is defined based on context. So for the future work, if extending it to non-contact movement is mentioned. And secondly, as the current character control models need to be retrained from scratch when the signal is adjusted, the author said it would be nice if this training time issue can be improved. And finally, extending the current framework for physically based animation also has mentioned. So these are the reference I took for this presentation. And yeah, this is the end of my presentation. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask.
Nice presentation. So I have a question still related to my previous question. So is the motion of the character determined by the given ball position, or the position or the motion of the ball is determined by the character pose, character motion? Or both are determined at the same time by some other user input?
I haven't think of how the sequence of between them, because both input and output has the character state and ball state together. So I'm not sure which one goes first.
Okay, yeah. And also, still related question, anyone else to answer?
The state of the character and the state of the ball are concatenated to one vector and goes into the network at the same time. And the output is also the pose of the character and the position and velocity of the ball. So they're all kinematic.
So
data.
position of the balls are not physically simulated, they are learned. So if they are
Nothing
learned,
here is
then
physically simulated.
they are not, the ball is not physically simulated. It's learned. Okay, then in this case, it seems that the character is motion captured for the learning process. How about the ball? Is ball also captured? Motion of the ball also captured?
I think both are included in the vocab data.
So in the motion capture session, they capture not only the pose of the human and the pose of the character, but also the motion of the ball.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, it's also captured. Okay.
Yes, you can see the ball is floating when the upper local phase of upper body is off.
In the
video,
result?
Yeah, in the result. So that means the ball is not physically simulated.
So the ball is also captured.
Yes, right.
Okay.
And the paper says that the ball, the network outputs overrides the ball states and during context, and when they are not in contact, the ball is physically simulated. So yeah.
Okay, so both learned and physically simulated.
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Is there any other question?
Can I ask 2 questions?
Yes.
So first, is about the input signal, input control signal, and is the input just like direction on which the character should move, or is there any other like control signals that can do like those fancy dribbling movements?
I think it contains more than direction information.
So like in runtime, so like what kind of input are the user giving? Is it just the direction, or is there additional like buttons that can do certain dribble actions?
There are certain buttons that can control the specific action of the character, like spinning or shooting the ball.
Okay, thank you. And the other question is, it's about the training scheme that you briefly mentioned, that the gating network might actually overfit. So they use some kind of trick. Could you elaborate that a little bit?
Actually, the paper only mentioned that they use the teacher voicing technique to just prevent the overfitting in one sentence. And actually, there was no other explanation in the paper. So,
So what was the term again? The teacher
forcing, I think.
Okay, I'll figure it out. Thank you.
Okay.
I think the control inputs are synthesized data because they cannot acquire the user control inputs for general cases. So they first train with synthesized user control input, and by injecting some dropout layers, they use some generalizability to real user control. And in runtime, they add some noise to the latent vector for various motions.
Is this regarding the first question I have asked?
Yes.
So I guess when I
I'm
saw the
very
last,
sorry to interrupting,
Yeah.
but we don't have enough time to finish all the presentation today because we have an who also I report because he is from the outside of the lab. I think we should finish that earlier than the other things. Can you guys, what is it, conversate after the seminar? I'm sorry, we only have like 20 minutes left.
okay.
Okay, then I will end my presentation. Thank you for listening my presentation.